So for our next section, which would be a fairly short one, dealing with getting into the fall of 2016, courtesy of Jonathan Cahn, Messianic Rabbi's new book, The Avatar. Looking at some stuff, I'm going to share an item of review to bring us to where we are going to end for this middle section here. So let's pick up on this very next slide here. So, mentioned this at the time when we were going through Return of the Gods, and so this is something that took place in New York. This is called the Arch of Baal. Yes, the very same Baal that is the false god mentioned in the Bible. And so this was part of the pagan worship from the Middle East. Well, New York thought, so this recreated arch here, and we talked about this at the time a while back, went on tour as this cool thing to celebrate and to share. So here it is in New York, and it would later go to Washington, D.C. But here it is in New York, and this is celebrated as a good thing. There's another look at it. And here's the unveiling of it. Here they're actually playing ancient music to celebrate the arch that's the gateway to Baal, where child sacrifice and all sorts of other things took place. And this is happening in New York, the abortion capital of America. So go figure. So bringing out these things to point out, as in our last session, these things were happening, but we may not have realized the spiritual undercurrent and significance of these things that were happening. Well, here it's getting pretty blatant. There's no problem celebrating Baal in New York here in 2016. Might want to think twice about that. Or might want to check and see if something else is amiss here. But that brings us to the Avatar for this middle section, and it'll close in a third section after this. So what are we going to talk about here? Well, October 20, so that was September 19th, by the way, of 2016. Now we're on October 26th of 2016. So, 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 2 says this. A lot of stuff's in 2 Kings with what we're looking at here. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 2. Actually, let's go to 2 Kings 2. Let's go to verse 19. Well, let's see. Actually, we can go back up. In verse 18, as horsemen are sent out to check on Jehu, see what he's about. 2 Kings 9:18. So a horseman went to meet him and said, "This is what the king says. Is your intention peace?" But Jehu said, "How is peace any business of yours? Turn around and follow me." And he would go on to say things about, and let's go down to 22, because another writer goes, and he comes up, and he meets the king. 2 Kings 9:22, when Joram saw Jehu, he said, "Is your intention peace, Jehu?" And he answered, "What peace, so long as your mother Jezebel's acts of prostitution and witchcraft are so many." So, how can there be peace while your mother's prostitutions and witchcraft are happening? So spiritual adultery, false gods, and witchcraft being brought up here. The actual word used by Jehu for witchcraft is the Hebrew kashaf, which refers to the casting of spells and incantations. Such things were typical of ancient pagan worship as practiced by Jezebel, along with sympathetic magic, fortune-telling, and the invoking of spirits. The rites and rituals of ancient pagan worship have survived into the modern world under the heading of witchcraft. It didn't all stay back then and back there. So, as the witches of Jehu's time would have seen in him their enemy, so the witches of America and around the world saw Trump as their enemy. They decided to launch a campaign against him, a witches campaign. They gathered across America and the world under the crescent moon to cast their spells, incantations, and curses against Donald Trump and his presidency. And here is such an invitation. Witches, we need you. Hex on the NRA, curse for Trump, love potion for all earth peoples. Isn't that nice? But yeah, people who consider themselves modern witches were really doing this in October of 2016, heading into the election. This was real for them. So what do you think? I mean, we're chuckling in one sense because, and it's okay, because it boggles our modern rational mind to think that people were either doing this or were serious about this. Now, I love me a good Ren fair. I'm happy going to a Renaissance fair or whatever, having fun, but I don't believe that, the fantasy side of it, and it's kind of funny. Alyssa and I went to one recently, and she especially is picking out, okay, they're doing the fantasy side of it. Here they're doing like they're trying to be realistic and accurate for the times and all that stuff. And you see different people coming in with different approaches, and hey, just have fun, whatever. But it never occurred to me that going to this stuff, hey, that the wizard stuff and the witch stuff and all the stuff was something to be really serious about. Now, I also do recognize that apart from people being playful, whatever, that sadly, there is a real reality to this stuff. There are people who are deadly serious in their anti-Judeo-Christian godness. It's not just nature and paganism and live and let live and good white witches or any of this. No, there is an evil and not just, again, not live and let live, because evil can't live and let live. Evil is a parasite. It has to feed off of life. And so there is an evil intended, witch-based, and not limited to witches, but including them, as happened here, intention to act against, to be activist, acting against the Judeo-Christian values and those people promoting Judeo-Christian values, which is you and me. And so they have declared us their enemy. And Sister Ashley. As the serpent deceived Eve. On a mission. And that's come up a couple times in conversation at home about the kid, because it's such. I'm so glad Sister Diana brings that up, because it's very true. And what does Revelation 12 say? The dragon goes after the woman. Now, the woman is not only Mary in the case of Herod, but also the nation of Israel that birthed the child Jesus, who is the Messiah for them and the Christ for us. And so, yeah. So sometimes, sad to say, but got to say it, sometimes our spiritual enemies are more dialed in and tuned into what's happening spiritually than we are. And they know full well what they're doing, and they can deceive us in our cluelessness, in our ignorance. Now, I'm very grateful for what Paul said in the scriptures. He said, be wise in what is good, be innocent in what is evil, which means we don't have to be aware of what's going on and know thy enemy, be aware of our spiritual enemy. We don't have to obsess over it. We aren't supposed to be diving into the darkness. I'm taking us on a cursory journey to be aware, but we're not taking deep dives into the stuff, because that's actually contrary to Scripture. I'll even say that I've gotten a kick out of watching on TV, ghost hunter TV shows. I had a coworker one time said, hey, I'm an actual ghost hunter. You want to go with me? No. No, I'm not going to actually, from the safety of my TV, I'll see some, that tripped over there. What was that? Whatever. But I'm not going to go actually in person, go mess with any of that. No. I've had people in church once upon a time, and I've shared this before, say, we think our home might be haunted, or there might be demonic activity. Well, how about we focus on Christ instead of going demon chasing? Let's focus on Christ. Guess what? Demons ain't going to like that. So if you focus on Christ and his truth and his goodness and keep proclaiming his name, they're not going to... You get my point. Don't go diving into the darkness. Don't get sensationalized about the darkness. Be aware of it. Don't, as Eve misunderstood the serpent who was deceiving her, know your enemy, know him for what he is, being able to recognize him for who he is, but don't give him an in, and make sure that we are focusing on Christ and keeping ourselves in his hedge of protection, keeping ourselves in his goodness, and being about proactively in our spiritual warfare, putting on those items from Ephesians 6 that are how we go about our lives day to day, and we won't have to worry about the stuff. We can be aware of it, but we don't have to worry about it. There's a big difference. Does that make sense? Cool? Everyone good there? Well, let's move on to other things besides this. So we'll stop that screen share. And we'll stop that quick recording for mid-2016 into the fall. And now our last session will take us from the end of 2016 into 2017. So we'll hop over into that.